You're listening to Healing Voices Project, where we share stories and the latest information from people who fight addiction every day. I'm Mike Torville, your host and author of Voices from the Fallen. Thank you for listening, for following, and most of all, for sharing with people you care about. Make your voice count too. Hello everybody, glad you're back with us at Healing Voices Project. I'm Mike Torville, your host, and we also have our guest here today. We always have guests, I never do this alone, and our guest today is Kevin Rosario from Gosnold Behavioral Health. Thanks for coming, Kevin. Glad to have you here.
My pleasure.
Again.
Yes.
And Kevin is the Director of Community Outreach for Gosnold Behavioral Health and holds a bachelor's degree in business administration right now. And you are a nationally certified intervention professional and recovery coach.
Yes.
But also, you're continuing your school and working on your MBA and due to graduate this May, correct?
Yes, sir.
All right.
Yes, sir.
That's fantastic. Yeah. Now, there's a lot about Gosnold that I've learned. First of all, you just hit your 50th anniversary at Gosnold.
Correct.
And that says a lot, obviously, with the success you've had. And you've been there for 9 years yourself.
Yep.
You're in recovery for 13 years.
Yes, sir.
You've got a lot to talk about, and I know if any of the listeners have listened in a previous episode, we talked to Kevin about his personal story, which is very inspiring, and certainly what led Kevin to Gosnold. I want to talk a little bit about Gosnold, the programs, and what happens there. And now, we often talk about it on this show too, because. And I hear it so often, people don't know what to do. Or the first thing is, geez, we encountered this problem and we had no idea what we didn't know. Mm-hmm. And so navigating treatment, it can be overwhelming. It can be confusing. And sometimes complicated, because it appears complicated because it just, what do I do? Do I go here first? And as your Director of Community Outreach, that's primarily a big function of what you do, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
You're helping families navigate and working with different, liaison between clinical professionals, EAPs, HR departments, behavioral health centers, and acting as a liaison between the people they serve.
Right. To
clear the path a little bit and to point them in, to guide them.
Right.
That's a big part of your job, among many other things that you do. And I know you're very active in the community. You've got a lot going on. We were talking earlier. You're just going 90 miles an hour.
Yeah. Some days more than others.
Right. But so let's tell you a little bit about Gosnold. And they've been around 50 years, so you got to be doing something right. So in a nutshell, what is the program all about?
Well, thank you, first of all, again, for having me back,
Sure.
Mike. And Gosnold really is like a special program, and anyone that knows me knows I'm a hustler, I'm ambitious, I'm in school, and I've stayed with Gosnold for 9 years because I believe in what they do. It's not about the money. Like, I hate to say this, but Richard knows, the CEO, we talk about it often, and he's been a great mentor for me. I can go somewhere else and make more money. I can go in the for-profit space and get a raise today, but it doesn't have that feel-good energy, right? It's all about utilization and payer mix and and it's all about the business. Like, I'm a business guy, I get it. But what's special about Gosnold is the things they do behind the scenes, behind the curtains that people don't know. I feel like there are special people and special programs that I don't want to leave. I don't want to just be a business guy, right? So I say that before I get into the whole services, because the organization, 50 years of service, right? Non-profit, which also people don't know, not-for-profit. It means there's not someone getting rich as a result of trying to help this vulnerable population. At the end of the year, if there's a deficit, you eat it. If there's a surplus, you reinvest it into the company. It's not like, someone's cashing out. So I think that's one thing that makes it special. Second thing that makes Gosnold special is being in network with everything, right? We take mass health. Nobody wants to take mass health because the reality is we have a broken system and the Medicaid rates have historically been very low. They're just supposed to go up on July 1st and hopefully that's going to happen. But even that is 3 years too late. Everyone that's been trying to take mass health has been bleeding because there's no parity in reimbursement versus like an Aetna versus a Medicare or a Medicaid. So guess what? There's not a lot of options for those folks. Gosnold takes mass health. we're not just a detox. We have a medical detox. We also have a 28-day inpatient rehab program called CSS, Clinical Stabilization Services. Again, we're in network with everything. And then they also have outpatient. So there's a lot of great programs. I'm not throwing shade on anyone else, but a lot of people there's buckets, right? Someone has a detox, someone has a rehab, someone has a PHP program, someone has sober living. There's a recovery coach organization. Gosnold has everything, just about everything. And things have changed over the years. We've had to modify and make adjustments based on the market and based on what the community needs. But you can send a loved one to Gosnold and they're going to go to detox for 5 to 7 days. They have the option of 2 to 4 weeks of clinical stabilization. They could move on to the partial hospitalization program, and we have one in Stoughton on the Brockton line, and then we have one on Cape Cod in Centerville, which is a little town in Hyannis. And that is a mental health only or mental health and substance use track program. And from 9 to 2:30, they're in group programming, cognitive behavioral therapy, mindfulness, anything from music and redirection and meditation, but with a focus on mental health, treating the underlying symptoms. And that's one thing I give Richard credit for. Like Ray Tomasi was a CEO for 26 years. He was with Gosnold for 42 years. Great man, put Gosnold on the map, did amazing things in the community. I worked with him before the transition. He went into retirement and brought on Richard Kukuru. Richard Kukuru is an LICSW who's got his whole career in psychiatric services.
Okay.
So at that time, 6 years ago and some change, we were seeing more and more co-occurring folks, which means they have addiction and mental health, right? Higher levels of anxiety, depression, PTSD, medication. You need to treat both. In a perfect world, you need to treat both at the same time. And so Gosnold, having already at that time 45 years of addiction services, now to bring in Richard, who brought in Allie and all these other clinical mental health people, now we have really strong mental health and addiction services. We can treat both simultaneously. Whereas historically, you go to your psychiatrist and they often give you controlled medications for your anxiety or depression. You're getting Adderall, Xanax, all kinds of benzos, which is sometimes counterproductive to when you go into your recovery programs because
it's exacerbating the problem, obviously.
Right.
Yeah.
Our people, because I'm a person in long-term recovery, have a history and a tendency to misuse these powerful medications. So now at Gosnold for the last 6 years, we have a dual diagnosis or co-occurring program so those folks can get the treatment. Within 2 days, they see a psychiatrist or a psychiatric nurse practitioner, some kind of mental health prescriber. Within the first week, they get individual therapy, and then they're in comprehensive group programming from 9 to 2:30 every day for like up to a month. It's based on clinical necessity and stuff like that, but really comprehensive. Then they can step down to our intense outpatient program, which is 9 to 12. So someone can go to Gosnold inpatient if they need to. They don't have to. They can start at PHP for, say, 30 days. Then they can do PHP and in the intense outpatient program for another 6 to 8 weeks. So it's 2 months. They could be in sober living for a year or more and continue on with us for individual therapy and psychiatry or medication management and whatever else they need. And also, which we highly recommend, we have free family support groups. We have some in person and we have some virtual because we need to help the family. The family often has PTSD from watching their loved one suffer, right? And we know that if the family buys in and the family can learn about recovery and learn about, the appropriate ways to support a person in recovery, the whole family unit has a better chance of success. So Gosnold, again, has these bookends. It's not just detox, it's not just sober living, it's not just outpatient. We also have recovery coaches that can work with the patient for a year or more.
And their families.
And that's just like the direct care stuff that most people kind of hear about that we have all in one package. The other stuff is like we have Gosnold clinicians in over 60 schools on and off Cape Cod doing early intervention work, working with adjustment counselors, working with principals for at-risk young people to try to help them get the support they need. It's often not the high schools with actual substance use. It's the elementary schools and it's behavioral, right? You see a 10-year-old kid that maybe mom died, maybe dad died. In some cases, they both have passed already because of overdose. They're being raised by grandma. They're not using drugs in elementary school. They have anxiety. They're acting out.
Which is something you can relate to because in our previous meeting, we talked about your early childhood experiences that led to that as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's so much science now. This isn't like the 1930s where they're bad people. They choose to do this. And there's still some, obviously, still some stigma around that. But the truth is we know about the brain now. We know about the prefrontal cortex that doesn't fully develop until the mid-20s. And among other things, but most importantly when it comes to substance use and like adolescent poor decision making, it's responsible for decision making, impulse control, risk assessment, right? So the part of the brain that says, don't do that, that's a bad idea, you're going to die, is not fully operational until the mid-20s. More bad news. You smoke weed, you vape, you drink alcohol, stunts that part of the brain. So what does that do? Puts you at an increased risk to make more bad decisions, which is exactly in line with my story. 13 years old, hyperactive, smoking weed, and then you got another decade of poor decision making, poor impulse control.
You were hyperactive?
No.
I can't believe
I'm
that.
I'm a picture of serenity, Mike.
I know. But your point, I get it, because you're right. And it sort of deteriorates that part of the brain, and that filter is no longer there. Right?
So the goal,
exactly. Yeah.
The goal is if we see young people that are exhibiting behavior, intervention, how do we give them skills, coping skills? If they're down, how do we build them up? If they have trauma, how do we help them process that? Because we know a young person who has genetic predisposition because it runs in their family, who's exhibiting those behaviors at a young age, if that person even tries a vape, they're at an extreme risk to become full-blown addicted because of biology, because of the brain, and because of the untreated or underlying emotional or mental health stuff that's going on. So we have a team of people doing great work in that area as well. You know, and also we have recovery coaches in hospitals all the way out to Needham, Milton, Plymouth, Hyannis, Falmouth, and we have people that when someone comes to the hospital, and whether they overdosed or they got in an accident or they just self-walked in and report, like, I need help. Before, the hospitals are not built for that. You get a sheet of paper and say, here, call these places, you know, we can help you. Now a recovery coach will sit with them and dial for dollars. And it's often not even Gosnold, right? We can't even meet the demand. We don't have enough beds for the amount of people that need help.
How many beds do you have?
We have 92 beds right now, 50 detox, 42 CSS residential rehab beds. And it's still not enough. You know, the demand is so great. You know, there's a lot of treatment centers, but a lot of them only take commercial insurance, which has, you know, affected Gosnold over the last, 5 to 7 years, because Gosnold was like the place. There was the ad cares and the spectrums and some places that have been around a long time as well. But the for-profit space blew up in Massachusetts over the last 5 years. And so now everyone is really taking the private insurance and the self-pay folks. And guess what? Now the mass health people, they're still in the same boat. They still have limited resources. So you need the places like Gosnold and Gavin and AdCare, and AdCare got bought out as well. But you need the nonprofits that take Medicare, scratch that, Medicaid, to survive. Because that's the population that needs the most help. I mean, everybody deserves good treatment. If you got an HMO or a PPO and you're a lawyer, good for you. You have options and you deserve high quality treatment. But the folks who are like homeless, living on someone's couch, who have been through the ringer, who have been in and out of jail, and they're stuck on state insurance. Like,
this is why you take Mass Health.
Yeah, because not everyone's going to. Someone has to. So that's why I have a lot of passion for Gosnold, because it's not all about money. You got no money, you got no mission. You need to make X amount of money to make payroll, but the mission is like, how do we help people? How do we support people? How do we help families? If there's a need, like the school-based thing, how do we get a grant? That program started on like, we'll just send you someone and we'll figure it out. Then they got a grant. Then they were raising money, and then they found a way to make it reimbursable so that it's sustainable. But no one in any of the schools that need service will be turned away if they don't have insurance or money. Everyone can get the service. Wow. The recovery coaches all get paid a salary to work in hospitals to generate more mass health business. It's not a hustle. It's not helping Gosnold financially. It was humans were getting
it's a legitimate need,
and dying.
Yeah.
So how do we help? And like, I can go on and on about how all the programs Gosnold has that fights to break even or loses money, but they're needed services. And most people, even myself, I gotta be honest, when I first started at Gosnold, I'm listening, and they're like, oh, well, we're gonna budget, $30,000 loss here. I'm like, I'm an ROI guy. If it doesn't make money, why are we doing it? Yeah. Like, I had to buy into like the nonprofit world. It's not about everything making money. But if the organization as a whole can raise money, get grants, and generate enough revenue to support the whole system, then we can do all the cool things that maybe no one else will do, because they're not profitable, they're not sustainable, And that's really the big difference. It's not. It's always been need-based. They find a need, they create the program, and then they work backwards to make it sustainable.
Sounds like you've had good leaders, good management, and for being around for 50 years, certainly you are sustaining,
Right.
and able to grow. Now I been through your website and amazed with the inpatient, outpatient, community programs you have, and I know I was reading it says that Gosnold reports a 90% treatment completion rate upon discharge when the patients engage in 15 or more days at the clinical stabilization services level of care. Now 90%, it sounds great,
Right.
but there's a little catch to that, isn't there?
Yeah, there is. The truth is, like, it's a great statistic,
Mm-hmm.
but, like, let's put it in perspective. So 90% of people complete that make the 15-day mark. It's typically a 30-day program. So if you can get through the first 2 weeks, which is a transition, it's a new place, maybe you're experiencing post-acute withdrawal syndrome, you're uncomfortable, you struggle with structure, there's a lot of reasons. But if you can get past that 2-week mark, you had a 90% chance of completing the program and probably going on to do better. So the challenge that now that we've identified some of these benchmarks is
Getting them through the first 2 weeks,
Yeah.
right? Because is it common that people will leave after 4 or 5 days?
Yeah.
And how do you stop that? How do you
Right.
keep them in?
I got to tell you, like, it's impressive the number of people. Like, usually, I don't know, I haven't been involved at high level jobs in healthcare, but I would assume that the directors are usually the people. Hey, figure it out. People leave an AMA against medical advice. People leave an ACA. Bi-weekly, you got the chief executive officer, the chief clinical officer, the chief finance, like the chiefs are in the room with the directors and the RAs and everybody on an AMA and patient engagement group talking about how many people left in the last 2 weeks. At what day did they leave? Were they male or female? What type of insurance? What time of day? And what are we going to do to stop that?
Yeah, what are we going to do different to keep them longer, right?
It's been 5 years that the senior team and the directors and why, which I also think shows some leadership and humility, is they bring in the people that are on the floor. It's not just people in the White Tower trying to figure it out. It's like, no, we know you're in the trenches. What are you seeing, right? And so to answer your question, it's like, well, we ask them exit interview questions. We do groups every morning. What do you like? What don't you like? Sometimes they're just uncomfortable. Sometimes it's a medication adjustment. Sometimes it's the job. Sometimes they come in, and after a few days when they come out of their fog, they panic. They have an open case. The wife's freaking out. There's a lot of different factors. And so every morning they have rounds, and they'll talk about, who's at risk today? What have you heard on the unit? Who's getting edgy? Because you'll often see
Those are the clues.
they're on flight mode.
Right.
Right. And the reality is like, some people, no matter what you do, you won't be able to stop. Sometimes the nature of addiction is they'll give you 1,000 stories, but the truth is they feel so uncomfortable that their brain says, you got to get out of here and you have to use or you're going to die. Right. I said that in a previous episode. Like, it gets ingrained like that's the only solution. And drugs and alcohol are not the problem for most of these folks. Like, untreated abstinence is the problem. You take drugs and alcohol away from a person that's been through physical, sexual trauma, who's blown up their whole life, who maybe ruined a career opportunity, or how many athletes ruined an opportunity, how many people have blown up their family, right? So on day 3 or 4, when the medication's starting to taper and the heaviness of life and the consequences and the mistakes and the trials and the obstacles that are waiting for you out there is so overwhelming that they just got to go. And they have to seek relief in the only way they know how. So we do our best. I think we do better than most. There's another statistic somewhere on the website that talks about, like, all the other state agencies have, a 32% AMA rate, and we're at like 22. Don't quote me on those numbers, but we're a little better than most because we put so much energy into it. And the reality is, like, some people are going to leave. And even the scarier reality is, like, some people are going to die, but we do our best to keep people engaged, to keep them in treatment as long as possible. The longer they have a support system around them, they have a better chance of staying in long-term recovery. So there's a lot of energy and a lot of initiatives. I can't even explain all the bullets. And we made a position where the guy's like point person. He's like an interventionist. The guy is a lead interventionist that was working in the community, Mike, and they put him in the detox just to have that high level skill interventionist person in the building at all times, which has had a positive impact. Just talking about it's had an impact. Little things like, we got games, we got a little radio so they can listen to music on in between groups. Like, you'd be surprised. Sometimes it's like, there's never forks out after 4 p.m. or spoons and we want to eat cereal. no problem. Got a box of plastic sports or whatever, right? And so I think it's more about, one, being aware that it's a thing, and listening to patients and the staff that are there every day to make the adjustments. And I feel like our team really has put a lot of effort into that, and patient care is number one. Patient care is number one. Everything else we try to figure out. And people will say, I went to other places, but I come back here when I'm ready because I know it's serious here. I know people care. I know you're going to make me go to group, and I'm ready now. I don't want to play games. I'm not trying to do the bare minimum. We're going to hold them accountable because we're not helping anybody if we let them sleep in bed for 7 days. Detox is never going to solve the problem. We need them awake. We need them going to groups, and we need to be talking about the next step, because if they leave after detox, most people don't survive. Not that they die, but they're not able to stay abstinent with detox alone. It's when they go to CSS, when they go to PHP, when they stay in long-term treatment, when they have clinical support, when maybe they're getting prescribed non-narcotic medication to take the edge off for the first few months, when they're going to meetings every day, when they're going to the gym, when they're mindful of their nutrition and diet. Maybe they go to church if they have a church background. It's not one thing. How do we bring all these supports and all these pieces to give the person the best chance of success? And not everyone's going to be therapy, and not everyone's going to be AA, and not everyone's going to be medication-assisted treatment. Not everyone's going to go to church. One thing I think Gosnold does really well is they say, we're going to throw everything at everyone and let them decide which things are most beneficial to them. Here's AA, NA, here's Smart Recovery, here's, Refuge Recovery, here's 3 different medication-assisted treatment options, here's a spirituality group, here's music, here's cognitive behavioral therapy, here's de-escalation, here's, meditation. And the longer we have them, 1, we can introduce more interventions and modalities and therapies to them, and 2, they get to practice it a little bit, so that by the time they go back to the real world, they have a few tools in the tool belt.
Yeah, something more meaningful to them, because you're right, it's never ever a one size fits all.
No.
And and you've seen that 1,000 different ways.
Yeah. Do
you ever get discouraged?
Sometimes, I'd be lying if I didn't say that. I actually am a big fan of self-care and boundaries. Because even though I do talks on anti-stigma, even though I do talks on treatment navigation, even though I can do a PowerPoint on the brain, when you see little Billy coming in for the 8th time, you're like, oh my God. And your first judgmental thought is like, this kid again? But the truth is, I've been to detox over 9 times, and I've always been loud and hyperactive. I'm sure the counselor's like, oh crap, here's Rosario again, right? No chance of success. Let's just get him out of here. They want to snow me with medication to calm me down, right? The truth is, though, you never know if this is the time. And we have to set aside our BS and our own stigma and our own fears and our own expectations on patients and come to work every day like, today could be the time. Today could be the time. So yeah, I do find myself once in a while, I get aggravated, I get frustrated, and it's not even like I judge them. It's like, man, they're going to die. The reality that every day we deal with people that tomorrow on Facebook I see that they have passed is a real thing. It creates this anxiety. You just want to shake them sometimes. You just want to help them. But it's important as professionals, even more so professionals in this field that are in recovery. This is not your recovery. This is a job. I get paid every week. I have a service to do. After work, I do volunteering. I go to meetings. I pick people up. That's my recovery. At work, I have a job to do. And I have to have a boundary, and I have to do the best I can do. I have to have a positive attitude. I have to use professional language, and I have to just believe that today could be the day.
You have to maintain that, because it is easier to say than to practice.
Yeah.
But yet you have to focus on that.
Right.
Because if you don't, you'll wear yourself out.
People get burned out.
Right.
Even people that are not with substance use disorder, not in recovery, they get burned out, because you usually get people in this field that care. Caring can go to an unhealthy line if you don't have a boundary. You got fixers and carers, and maybe they have a history of their own, so something, they bring that to work. I need to help and save and do all these things. Self-care is the most important thing. Good training, good management, being encouraged to take a little time off if you can, even if we're a little short, because I'd rather be a little short than you burn out and not do a good job anyway and miss something that's important, not do proper notes. Like, not be your best self for that patient. I need your best self. I don't need your burned out, like, I don't want to be here self. It's not the energy we need. So it is easier said than done. But I can tell you, just for me personally, if I tell my boss, hey, I need a few days, he's like, no problem. Make sure your appointments are good, change your voicemail if you need backup, take a few days, do whatever you got to do to be your best self, because that's what we need.
You need to reset every now and then.
Yeah, it can be heavy though. All you see is, you hear about the death, you see the recidivism, you see the in and out. It's easy to get negative. It's easy for politicians and government people to look at the negativity, because the only tracking we can do is patient ID numbers. Patient ID numbers come from people that are actively seeking treatment. We don't track someone with 5, 10, 20, 30 years in recovery, because they go off into the sunset. They don't have a trackable patient ID number anymore, right? So we need to remember, like, people do get well. People do recover. I'm not God. If you get well, I don't get credit. If you die, it's not my fault. My job is just to show up and give you a shot and hold the line and be consistent with people and stay out of the results. Mm-hmm. And if people struggle, we welcome them back. And if people are successful, we high five and congratulate them. And I'm grateful to say, I've only been at Gosnold 9 years. Gosnold has transformed and saved and played a role in thousands of people, probably hundreds of thousands of families, when you spread it out, because addiction affects the whole family.
Right.
Recovery affects the whole family. And you get a person loud and hyperactive like me in recovery, you can affect a community. And I don't think I'm all that, but like, I am not afraid to go on a computer. I'm not afraid to get in front of a podcast. I'll go on the mountaintop and scream that recovery is possible if you'll let me, right? So that's the energy we need. We need to stay positive. We need to stay focused. We need to support people in recovery and never forget that, like, recovery is possible.
You're right. You said a lot there. And, we could talk all day about this. And I want to have you back, because we talk about the brain. And I think there's so much to be said about that is still, to many people, myself included, there's so much you don't know about and what's affecting you and why certain things are triggered. We'd love to have you back for that.
Happy to be back.
And talk about that topic. And again, Gosnold, and the website is Gosnold, GOSNOLD.org. And there's a lot of information on your website to talk about and look at, in addition to all the things Kevin here talked about. And the phone number is 800-444-1554. Well, Kevin, thank you very much.
My pleasure,
Great
Mike.
having
Thank you.
And can't wait to have you back again. And everybody else, thanks for listening. And again, if you haven't seen Kevin's previous episode where he talks about his personal story, I suggest you tune into that. You'll find it on our website, healingvoicesproject.org. And thanks again everybody for listening, and thanks again, Kevin, for coming. We'll see you all soon. Thanks.
Thanks, Mike.